Annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anna sambhavaha. This is a line from Bhagavad Gita and it translates to: the food from the plants, which is annam, is the core life support for humanity, and the rain in turn is the core life support for the trees. And Bhagavan Sri Krishna says that this cycle has to run very smoothly for prosperity and happiness. And this is very much true in the context of the history of Bharat, because India has always been a pastoral and agrarian culture, and there has always been a very special bonding between the people of this country and the nature around. In fact, in the Rig Veda 10th Mandala, there is manifestation of a Devi with the name Aranyani, who is revered as the mother goddess of trees, plants, animals, birds, and the entire ecosystem around us. And she is revered as the mother of all the vegetation, which is the core life support of humanity. And the interesting thing here is, it's not just about praying, but also about protecting the trees and plants around us, the entire vegetation. And that's where a very ancient branch of knowledge, which is almost not known to many of us, or rather forgotten in time, the Vruksha Ayurveda arises. While Ayurvedam is an ancient branch of medicine which is meant to treat ailments and diseases in humans, Vruksha Ayurvedam is another branch of medicine which is specifically meant for plants and trees. It's all about the wellness of the plants and trees and crops and the vegetation around us. And this short video is our attempt to bring forward this almost forgotten branch of knowledge, the Vriksha Ayurvedam. The ancient scriptures that talk about Vruksha Ayurvedam are as follows. Of course, having its roots right from Atharvana Vedam, but in Agni Puranam is the first place where we see the Vruksha Ayurvedam being talked about. And then eventually the Ardha Shastra written by Chanakya in 350 BCE, and then Brihad Samhita by Varahamihira in 520 CE, and Vriksha Ayurvedam by Surapala in 1000 CE. These are 4 to 5 very important ancient scriptures on Vriksha Ayurvedam. These scriptures gives us a wealth of information related to the plants, crops and trees, starting right from how to understand the soil, its properties, what would be the amount of water the soil would be needing, what type of grains that we need to choose, and what is the right time and the way to plant them, how to nurture them, how to protect them, and eventually how to preserve the crop. So basically the end-to-end cycle of an agriculture or protecting the trees are described by these scriptures. And this compendium collectively is known as Vriksha Ayurvedam. Broadly, the Vriksha Ayurvedam is internally classified into 12 chapters. Now let's flip through what these 12 chapters are about. The first chapter of Vriksha Ayurveda is about soil. That's where every story starts and every story ends. So the Bhumi Nirupana chapter, the first one, it talks about different types of soil, its properties, and the amount of water consumption of a specific soil. What precautions one has to take care if a crop is planted on a given type of a soil, and if a given type of a soil is not fertile, how to synthesize the fertility into that soil through various means. So everything to do with soil is described in this very first chapter, Bhumi Nirupana. Up next is the second chapter, Bijotpatti Vidhi, and this chapter deals with the gradation and preservation of seeds, how to choose the right quality of a seed for a crop, and at the same time how to preserve the seeds in such a way that the potential of the seed is well preserved. And the third chapter is Padapa Vivaksha, and this chapter explains about the details of the biology of various plants and trees, basically to understand the internal anatomy and mechanism of any plant or a tree so that we can nurture it accordingly. And the fourth chapter is Rupana Vidana, and this chapter is an extension for the previous one and talks in more detail about the senses and stimulations in trees, basically how the trees react to different kinds of stimuli, the external ones, explaining about the subtleties of a plant. The fifth chapter is Nischana Vidhi, which talks about the methods and techniques of irrigation, depending upon the type of soil and the climate we are in, and the availability of the water near to the crop. Different types of irrigation techniques are detailed out in this chapter. And not just that, it also explains about the amount of water that needs to be fed for the crop at different stages of growth, which is indeed a very crucial stage and part of the water supply. Up next is the 6th chapter, Poshana Vidhi, and this chapter completely focuses on fertilizing the crop and nurturing it in the early stages of life. So different types and techniques of preparing the fertilizers, feeding the fertilizers to the plant, and so on and so forth. So it's all about how do we nurture the plant during the early stages of it. Up next is chapter number 7, Druma Raksha. It's all about saving the plants and trees from extreme weather conditions and repairing the trees or the broken branches that happen due to external forces. So it's like if a tree or a branch is broken, how do we bring it back to life? How do we treat, just like how we treat a broken leg, how do we treat a broken branch of a tree? And this chapter specifically shows the sensitivity of the people back then towards the trees. And then we have chapter number 8, Taru Chikitsa. It's all about if a crop or a tree is infested with pests, now how we're going to treat them, a very common problem even today. So this chapter talks about treating different kinds of pests to different kinds of crops and trees. Up next is the 9th chapter, Upavana Kriya. And this chapter greatly details about the organization, cultivation and preservation of gardens. It talks about how to design a home garden. Depending on where you want to plant climbers, what are the best places to plant different kinds of plants and climbers and so on and so forth. And the 10th chapter is Nivasana Taru, and it talks about the benefits as well as the dangers of getting near to different kinds of plants. It talks about what kind of plants or trees that one should stay away from and what times, and which plants are good to have at homes and which plants are not good to have at home because of certain properties of those plants which could be harmful for humans, and so on and so forth. And the 11th chapter is Chitrikarana, and it's the most interesting chapter of all the 12. In this chapter, very interesting techniques about how to manipulate the plants or trees to achieve certain interesting properties. For instance, how to infuse fragrance to a flower which is not fragrant, how to infuse color to a specific plant or a leaf, how to change the form and shape of a tree. So in today's world, we use the word hybrid quite a lot, right? So it's something similar to it, but in an organic way. It talks about how to fuse two plants to give birth to a new variety of flowers or fruits, or altering basically the inherent properties of a tree through various means and techniques. That's this chapter, Chitrikarana. The 12th and the last chapter is Taru Mahima, and this chapter details about how deeply the existence of humanity is connected and based on the prosperity of plants and trees and vegetation around us, and how and why we need to protect the plants around us. And that's a very quick outlook about Vruksha Ayurvedam. And this particular slokam from Matsya Purana has a very deep meaning which resonates with that of the Vruksha Ayurvedam. And this is how it reads. Dashakupa samavapi, dashavapi samohradaha, dashahradah samah putro, dashaputro samo drumaha. What it means is having one pond is equal to having 10 wells, and having one lake is equal to having 10 ponds, and having one child is equal to having 10 lakes, and having one tree is equal to 10 children. The last word is incredible. Having one tree is equal to having 10 children. Vruksha Ayurvedam explains about a very sensitive perspective of our ancestors. It simply shows how compassionate people were back then towards the nature. And probably that's the reason they were both praying and protecting the nature back then. And this is our small attempt to bring forward this ancient knowledge, which is the Vruksha Ayurvedam. And as always, thanks for watching.